He held a lighter to my living room rug while my daughter screamed, thinking the old man was miles away grieving a lie. My son-in-law and his convict friend thought they had trapped a senile pensioner in a burning cage, assuming the insurance money was as good as theirs. They were about to find out that I didn't just build this house to keep the world out. I built it to keep the monsters in until I was done with them, and they were about to learn that even old wood burns hotter than they ever imagined. If you are watching this, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are watching from, because what I'm about to share is proof that justice sometimes requires a heavy hand. It all started with a belief I held for 30 years. I've always believed that a man's home is more than just an assembly of brick, mortar, and timber. It is a living organism. It is a fortress against the chaos of the world outside. It is a vault where you curate the inventory of your life, the memories, the hard-won peace, and the people whose safety you value more than your own breath. My name is Thomas. For 30 years, I carried a gold badge and a service pistol as a detective lieutenant in the burglary and theft division. I spent 3 decades studying the physics of violation. I looked at splintered door frames, shattered window panes, and the hollow, haunted eyes of people who had lost their sanctuary. I learned a fundamental truth early on, one that applies as much to architecture as it does to crime. Structural failure rarely happens overnight. There are always signs: a hairline crack in the plaster, a floorboard that groans under a weight it used to bear effortlessly. The worst thieves, the ones who do the most damage, don't kick down the front door. They are invited in. They act like termites, eating away at the framing until the roof comes down on your head. I thought I was done with monsters when I handed in my badge. I was wrong. The monsters just changed their clothes. When I retired, I hung up my holster. But you cannot turn off the instincts. They are wired into the nervous system. I bought a large, sturdy colonial in the suburbs. It was a house with good bones, solid oak floors, a wraparound porch, and a foundation deep enough to withstand a hurricane. It was intended for my wife, Martha, and me to grow old in. We were supposed to listen to the settling of the house together, but life rarely respects the blueprints we draw. Martha passed away 4 years ago. A sudden stroke. Just like that, the load-bearing wall of my life was removed. She left a silence in the hallways that was heavier than concrete. I tried to fill the void with woodworking, building cabinets, birdhouses, repairing furniture, and the scratching hiss of old jazz records. But the silence was stubborn. It hung in the air, waiting for something to break it. Then my daughter Emily moved back in. Emily was my heart. She had her mother's soft eyes that looked at the world with a dangerous amount of hope and a kindness that life hadn't yet managed to crush. But she didn't come alone. She brought her husband Jason with her. They were struggling. That was the word they used. It was a soft word for a hard reality. Jason was a financial consultant. In my experience, titles that vague usually covered up a lack of substance. His work seemed to involve a lot of hushed phone calls behind closed doors and manic typing on a laptop, yet very little actual income. I watched him from the periphery of my newspaper. He was a handsome man, in a glossy, magazine cutout sort of way. He had a smile that practiced too hard in the mirror, flashing too many teeth, the timing always a millisecond off, and his handshake. I hated shaking his hand. It was always slightly damp, clammy. It was the hand of a man whose internal temperature was constantly fluctuating from the stress of maintaining a facade. I didn't like him. My gut, honed by years of interrogating liars and thieves, twisted whenever he entered the room, but I tolerated him. I tolerated him because when he walked into the kitchen, Emily's face would light up. For a father, seeing his daughter happy is a powerful narcotic. It is often enough to blind him to the truth, staring him in the face. I wanted to believe he was good. I wanted to be wrong about him. For her sake, I tried to ignore the cracks in the masonry. The fracture began on a Tuesday evening in late October. The weather had turned. A cold, relentless rain was drumming a staccato rhythm against the dining room windows, washing the world in gray. The atmosphere inside the house was heavy, pressurized, matching the low-level headache I had carried since noon. We were finishing a pot roast. It was Martha's recipe, slow-cooked, tender, smelling of rosemary and red wine. Emily had added too much salt, a sign of her own distraction, but I didn't say a word. I just chewed methodically, watching the rain streak the glass. Jason put down his fork. The sound of the silver hitting the fine china was too loud in the quiet room. Clink! It echoed like a dropped coin in an empty well. He cleared his throat. I stopped chewing. I knew that sound. In the interrogation room, we called it the wind-up. It was the physiological reset a person does before they try to sell you a story. It was the prelude to request for money, or forgiveness, or both. "Thomas," he said. He never called me Dad. He knew better. "I have a situation, a family emergency." I wiped my mouth with my linen napkin, taking my time. I folded the fabric into a perfect square and placed it next to my plate. I looked him dead in the eye, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to sit in it. "Go on," I said. My voice was level, devoid of warmth. "My brother, Kevin," Jason said. He glanced quickly at Emily, his eyes darting for support like a drowning man looking for a buoy. "He's in a bad way. He lost his job at the logistics plant, and his landlord just evicted him." Jason leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, invading my space. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's been sleeping in his car for 3 nights, Thomas. It's freezing out there. The temperature is dropping tonight." I leaned back in my chair. The old wood creaked, a sound like a gavel hitting a block. I studied Jason's face. I looked for the micro-expressions, the twitch of the eyelid, the tension in the jaw. "I didn't know you had a brother named Kevin," I said. My voice was calm, low, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "At the wedding," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his pupils, "during the toast you said you were an only child. You made a point of it. You said Emily was the sister you never had." The air in the room suddenly tasted stale. The only sound was the rain lashing against the window, harder now, as if trying to get in. "Lies, they have a smell, like ozone before a lightning strike." Jason didn't flinch. I had to give him credit. He was good at the pivot. He was a professional slider. "Stepbrother," he corrected smoothly, the lie lubricating his throat. "From my dad's second marriage, we drifted apart a par ago. Lost touch, but he reached out yesterday. He's family, Thomas, and he's desperate. He just needs a place to crash." Emily chimed in. I looked at my daughter. Her voice was thick with empathy, trembling slightly. She had her hands clasped on the table, her knuckles white. She looked between me and Jason, desperate to bridge the gap, desperate to be the savior. "Just for a few weeks, Dad," she pleaded, "until he gets his first paycheck from his new job. We can't let him sleep on the street, not in this weather." She didn't see what I saw. She saw a man in need. I saw the slight sheen of sweat beading on Jason's upper lip, despite the coolness of the room. I saw the way his right foot was tapping a nervous staccato against the table leg. Tap, tap, tap. It was Morse code for panic. Something was wrong. This wasn't charity. This was a maneuver. "Financial problems," I said. I tested the weight of the words, throwing them out like bait. "Exactly," Jason nodded eagerly. Too quickly. "Just a temporary setback." "The economy, you know." My gut tightened. It was the same visceral warning signal I used to get when a suspect gave me an alibi that was mathematically perfect, rehearsed, polished, and utterly false. I felt the lie hanging over the roast beef. I knew bringing a stranger into this fortress was a mistake, a structural risk. But then I looked at Emily. Her eyes were wide, filled with that dangerous hope. If I said no, I became the villain. I became the cold, unfeeling father who turned away family. If I said no, I pushed her closer to him. I couldn't say no to those eyes. Not yet. 2 weeks, I said. My voice was flat, hard. I cut the air with my hand. He stays in the guest room above the garage. That is separate from the main house. He follows my rules. I leaned forward, matching Jason's posture, invading his space now. No smoking. No loud noise. No visitors. I locked eyes with Jason. I wanted him to see the badge I wasn't wearing. I wanted him to see the 30 years of hunting wolves. "And if I smell trouble," I whispered, "if I catch even a whiff of something wrong, he's gone. And we are going to have a very different conversation." "Thank you, Thomas," Jason exhaled. It was a little too loud, a release of hydraulic pressure. He picked up his wine glass and took a large gulp, his hand trembling just enough to make the liquid ripple. "You won't even know he's here," Jason promised. I knew he was lying. I knew I had just unlocked the gate for the Trojan horse. I just didn't know how many soldiers were inside. Kevin arrived the next morning at 9 a.m. sharp, bringing the gray sky with him. I was watching from the living room window, sipping coffee that had gone cold in my hand. He didn't pull into the driveway like a guest. He claimed it. He drove a battered, charcoal-colored sedan that looked like it had been in a demolition derby and lost. The muffler was held on by wire, and as the engine died, it gave a shuddering cough that rattled the glass in my frames. He stepped out. He didn't look like a logistics manager down on his luck. He didn't look like a man who had spent his career filing shipping manifests. He looked like a storm front moving in over the plains. He was shorter than Jason, but denser. He possessed a kind of compressed violence, like a coiled spring under too much tension. His neck seemed to disappear entirely into the slope of his shoulders, and he wore a canvas jacket that was 2 sizes too big, likely to hide things. But it was his hands that told the story. I zoomed in on them as he slammed the car door. His knuckles were swollen, scarred, the cartilage broken and reset more than once. Those were not the hands of a man who typed. Those were the hands of a man who hit walls, or faces. As he walked toward the trunk, I saw a dark stain spreading on the pristine concrete of my driveway. His car was leaking oil, a deliberate, dirty mark of territory. He popped the trunk and hauled out 2 large black duffel bags. He swung them over his shoulder, and when he set them down in the foyer a moment later, they didn't make the soft, muffled thump of clothing. It was a heavy, metallic sound. A dead sound. The vibration traveled through the oak floorboards and up through the soles of my slippers. I know the sound of a bag full of jeans and sweaters. That wasn't it. That was the sound of cold steel. Curry bars, bolt cutters, drills. Those weren't travel bags. They were a toolkit for dismantling a life. "Nice spread," Kevin grunted. His voice was like gravel in a blender. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Emily, who was fluttering nearby with nervous energy. He looked up at the crystal chandelier hanging in the foyer. He looked at the crown molding. He looked at the antique grandfather clock. He wasn't admiring the craftsmanship. He was appraising the liquidity. He was calculating the weight, the street value, and the pawn price. He was stripping the house to its studs with his eyes. "Shoes off?" I said. I stepped between him and the Persian rug in the living room. It was a subtle movement, a blocking maneuver I had used 1,000 times to stop a suspect from entering a crime scene. Kevin stopped. He slowly lowered his gaze from the chandelier to my face. His eyes were cold, flat, dead. They were the eyes of a shark that had just scented blood in the water. There was no soul there, only appetite. I had seen eyes like that in state penitentiaries, staring back at me through plexiglass. He smirked. It wasn't a smile of greeting. It was a slow curling of the lip that exposed a yellowed tooth. It was a challenge. "Sure thing, Pops," he said. He kicked off his heavy work boots, letting them tumble messily against the wall, scuffing the paint, but his eyes never left mine. He was testing the perimeter defenses. For the first week, the physics of the house changed. The air pressure dropped. The rooms felt smaller, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. The silence I had loathed after Martha died was replaced by something worse, a conspiratorial murmur. I would walk into a room, and conversation would die instantly, severed like a cut wire. Jason and Kevin would be huddled in the corner of the kitchen, heads close together, the steam from their coffee mingling. They spoke in rapid, hushed tones. The moment my boot hit the threshold, they would pivot. "So, the game on Sunday," Jason would stammer, his voice pitching up an octave. "You think the Pats have a shot?" They were terrible actors. But I wasn't just an audience member. I was a detective who had spent 30 years separating truth from performance. I watched them. I watched how Kevin moved through the house, silent for a big man, testing floorboards, checking window latches not to see if they were locked, but to see how easily they opened. I needed to know the baseline. I needed to know what the damage was. On Thursday, I decided to follow the money. I told Emily I was going to the hardware store. Instead, I drove to the bank downtown. I needed to check on a shared account I had set up for Emily years ago. An emergency fund meant for a down payment on a house or a medical crisis. I walked into the branch. The air conditioning was frigid, smelling of sanitized carpet and money. I sat down across from Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was the branch manager, an old friend who had known Martha. We had grilled together on the 4th of July for a decade. She looked tired. She adjusted her glasses, typed in my account number, and stared at the screen. Then she frowned. She clicked the mouse again, harder this time. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Thomas," she said softly. She turned the screen slightly away from me, a protective gesture. "Is everything okay with Emily?" My chest went tight. It was the feeling of a clamp closing around my heart. "Why?" I asked. "What do you see, Sarah?" "The emergency fund," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It was drained 3 days ago." "Drained? By who?" "Emily came in to sign for it," Sarah said. She looked pained. She came in with her husband. She looked unwell, Thomas. Shaky, like she hadn't slept in days. She was wearing sunglasses inside. Sarah leaned in, breaking protocol. She withdrew $40,000 in cash. We had to go to the vault. I stared at the fake plant in the corner of the office. $40,000. Jason had told me they were struggling. He had told me they needed help with groceries. This wasn't a struggle. This was a hemorrhage. This was a shakedown. Did she say why? I managed to ask. Jason did the talking, Sarah said. He said something about an investment opportunity that couldn't wait. But Thomas, he was holding her elbow the whole time, steering her. I walked out of the bank. The sun was shining on the pavement, bright and blinding, but it felt cold down to my marrow. I went home. I didn't confront them yet. A detective doesn't show his hand until he has a full deck. I needed to secure the perimeter. It was Friday night. The wind was howling around the eaves of the house. I went to the detached garage to check the locks. It was a habit, a ritual. The garage was my sanctuary, the place where I worked wood and forgot the world. The side door to the garage was unlocked. I froze. I knew I had locked it. I checked that deadbolt every single night at 10:00 p.m. I pushed the door open. The concrete floor was cold. The smell of sawdust and varnish was usually comforting, but tonight it was tainted by the smell of cheap cologne and sweat. Kevin was standing by my workbench. He had opened the top drawer of my red tool chest. He was holding my grandfather's antique pocket watch, a gold timepiece from 1920 that I kept wrapped in velvet in a locked compartment. He was turning it over in his thick, scarred fingers, watching the light catch the gold, looking for the time. I asked. My voice echoed in the cavernous concrete space. It was the voice I used on perps just before the cuffs went on. Kevin jumped. It was a small flinch, quickly suppressed, but I saw it. He nearly dropped the watch. "Just admiring the collection, Thomas," he said, recovering his smirk. "Cool stuff. Lot of history here." "It was in a locked drawer," I said. I stepped closer. I walked until I was inside his personal space, close enough to smell the stale tobacco on his breath. Lock was sticky. I jiggled it, he lied. He said it effortlessly, looking me right in the eyes. "Put it back," I commanded, "and stay out of my drawers. Stay out of my workshop." He looked at the watch one last time, running his thumb over the glass face, leaving a greasy smear. Then he tossed it back into the drawer. Clatter. He didn't place it gently. He threw it. He turned to leave. The doorway was narrow. As he walked past me, he didn't turn his shoulder to make room. He kept his chest square. He brushed against me. Hard. It wasn't an accident. It was a check. A physical test of dominance. He wanted to see if the old man would stumble. He wanted to see if I was frail. I didn't move an inch. I planted my feet and became a statue of granite. He wanted me to flinch. He wanted fear. I gave him stone. I watched him walk back to the guest room above. I locked the garage door. Then I added a padlock to the hasp. I went back to my study inside the main house. I unlocked my floor safe. I took out my old leather-bound notebook, the one I used to carry on stakeouts. I uncapped my pen. My hand was steady. Subject, Kevin, Alias. Notes. Aggressive. Thief. Skills with locks. Intimidation tactics. Event. Withdrew 40 cal cash via Emily Jason. I picked up the phone. It was late, but I knew who would be awake. Captain Miller, the voice answered. Gruff. Tired. Frank, I said. Tom. The tone softened. It's late. Everything okay? I need you to run a name, I said. I need a full workup. Deep dive. Go ahead. First name Kevin. Let's assume the last name is Smith for now, but cross-reference with Jason's known associates from his fraud trial. Look for cellmates. Look for guys who did time for burglary, arson, or racketeering. Trouble at home, Tom? Frank asked. I could hear the flick of his lighter on the other end. I have a fox in the henhouse, Frank, I said. I looked out the window at the dark windows of the garage apartment. And he didn't come for the eggs. He came for the slaughter. I'll put Ramirez on it, Frank said. The kid is a wizard with digital files. If this guy has so much as a parking ticket, we'll find him. Thanks, Frank. I hung up. The house was silent again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a fuse burning down. I knew the explosion was coming. I just didn't know if the house would be standing when the smoke cleared. The atmosphere in the house shifted from tense to suffocating. It felt like the air had been sucked out by a vacuum, replaced by a heavy, chemically induced lethargy. Emily was the epicenter of this silence. My daughter, who used to sing while she graded papers, who used to debate politics with me over breakfast, had become a ghost in her own home. She moved through the corridors with a slow, dragging gait, her feet scuffing the floorboards. Her eyes, usually so sharp and alive, were glazed over, swimming in a murky pool of confusion. I started watching them. I became a specter in my own castle. I learned to navigate the house without making a sound, stepping on the edges of the stairs where the wood didn't creak, oiling hinges at 3 a.m. One evening, standing in the shadows of the hallway linen closet, I heard them in the bedroom. Not enough time, Jess. Kevin's voice rumbled. It was low, impatient. I'm trying, Jason hissed back. She's resisting. She keeps asking questions. Make her stop asking, Kevin said. The menace in his voice was casual, like he was suggesting taking out the trash. The insurance covers everything, right? Structure and contents, everything. Replacement value, Jason said. But the old man, he never leaves. He's always watching. My blood ran cold. Insurance. The word hung in the dark hallway. They weren't just talking about theft anymore. Theft is a crime of removal. Insurance fraud is a crime of destruction. I needed to understand why Emily was so compliant, why she wasn't fighting back against the strangers in her home. I waited until they were in the backyard, smoking. I slipped into the master bathroom. I opened the medicine cabinet. There, behind the toothpaste, was a new bottle. Amber plastic. No label from a pharmacy. Just a handwritten sticker. Anxiety. I shook a pill into my hand. It was white, round, generic. I recognized the shape from my time working narcotics. It was a sedative, a shut-up pill. I called Dr. Evans immediately. He had been our family doctor for 20 years. He had set Emily's broken arm when she was 10. Doctor, I said, keeping my voice low, I'm worried about Emily. I can't discuss patient details, Thomas, he said. His tone clipped. You know the laws. I know the laws, I snapped. I enforced them for 30 years. But I'm telling you, she's walking into walls. She's slurring her words. There was a long, heavy pause on the line. I could hear him breathing. Thomas, he said carefully, choosing his words to skirt the legal edge. She came in with Jason last week. He did most of the talking. Let me guess, I said. He said she was having severe panic attacks. Uncontrollable anxiety. He described symptoms that required intervention, Evans said. I prescribed a mild sedative, but if she is appearing confused, or if she is taking more than the recommended dose, he talks for her, I whispered. He feeds them to her. Watch her, Thomas, Dr. Evans said. His voice lost its professional distance. She didn't seem anxious to me. She seemed defeated, broken. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, not from age, but from a rage so hot it felt like heartburn. They were drugging her. They were chemically restraining my daughter so she wouldn't notice they were dismantling her life. On Sunday morning, the violence escalated from chemical to physical. I was in the garden, deadheading the roses. Martha's roses. It was a cold, crisp morning. The kind of day that should be peaceful. Then I smelled it. It wasn't the smell of charcoal or lighter fluid. It was acrid, biting, chemical. It was the smell of accelerant. Smoke. I turned. A plume of black smoke was rising from the patio. I dropped my shears and ran. My knees popped, but I didn't feel the pain. I sprinted around the corner of the house. The gas grill was engulfed in flames. But it wasn't just the grill. The fire was angry. It was climbing. It was licking up the white vinyl siding of the house, turning the pristine material into bubbling black sludge. The heat was intense, radiating out in waves. "Fire!" I shouted. I grabbed the garden hose, twisting the nozzle with a force that nearly stripped the threads. I didn't panic. Panic gets you killed. I aimed the stream not at the center of the fire, but at the siding above it. Cool, the structure, starve the climb. I sprayed the wall, soaking the vinyl, creating a water barrier. The fire hissed, angry steam billowing into the air. I walked the stream down, smothering the grill, drowning the flames until there was nothing left but hissing metal and white smoke. The back door banged open. Jason ran out. He was wearing an apron. He looked pale, his eyes wide. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" he screamed. I left the gas on. I'm so sorry, Thomas." I didn't answer. I turned off the hose. I stood there, dripping wet, my shoes ruined, breathing in the smell of near disaster. I walked to the grill. I examined the controls. The gas knob wasn't just left on, it was turned to the absolute maximum. And there, fused to the metal of the burner, was the remains of a grease-soaked rag. It had been placed directly over the flame. "You don't grill at 10 in the morning, Jason," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "I was cleaning it," he stammered, wringing his hands. "I was burning off the grease. I went inside for 1 second to get the brush." I looked past him. Kevin was standing by the garage. He wasn't running. He wasn't panicked. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching. He was checking his watch. It wasn't an accident. It was a calibration test. They were testing the flammability of the siding. They were timing how long it took for the smoke to be seen. They were seeing how fast the old man could run. "You're lucky," I said to Jason. "If that siding had caught the insulation, the whole wall would be gone." "I know, I'm so sorry," Jason wept. "Don't let it happen again," I said. I knew then that I was dealing with something far darker than simple burglary. They didn't just want to steal the silver. They wanted an ash pile and a check. And if I happened to be sleeping in my room when the accident happened, well, that was just a bonus. I couldn't stay in the house. I needed intel. I needed to know the enemy's history. I drove downtown to the industrial district. I parked in front of a pawn shop on 4th Street that had bars on the windows and a sign that said, "We buy gold." I went around the back to the alley entrance. Eddie the rat was sitting on a milk crate, smoking a cigarette that was mostly filter. Eddie was a fence, a snitch, and a survivor. He heard everything that happened in the city's underbelly. He saw me and stood up, grinding the cigarette out with his heel. "Detective," Eddie said, his eyes darting left and right. "You're retired. You shouldn't be here."
A year.
"I'm not here as a cop, Eddie. I'm here as a customer." I pulled a photo out of my pocket. It was a grainy picture I had taken of Kevin with a telephoto lens from my study window. "Who is he?" Eddie squinted at the photo. He paled. He actually took a step back. "Put that away," Eddie whispered. "Name?" I demanded. "That's Malloy," Eddie hissed. "Kevin Malloy. But nobody calls him Kevin. They call him the Torch." "Arson? Specialist," Eddie said, looking over his shoulder. "He doesn't just burn things. He makes it look like electrical faults, gas leaks, acts of God. He's an artist with an accelerant." "Did he serve time with Jason?" I asked. Eddie nodded. "Jason was in for wire fraud. Malloy was in for 3 counts of arson and insurance fraud. They were cellmates at State for 2 years. So they aren't brothers, I said. Brothers in crime? Eddie grinned nervously, showing a gold tooth. But here's the kicker, Thomas. The word on the street? Jason is in deep. He owes 50 grand to Malloy's boss. A loan shark named Vinny. The V's. Gambling. Bad investments. Crypto. Stocks. He lost it all. Vinny isn't a patient man. If Jason doesn't pay by the end of the month, Vinny takes a finger. Then a hand. I handed Eddie a $50 bill. Thanks, Eddie. Watch your back, detective, Eddie called out as I walked away. Malloy likes fire. He likes to watch things burn. He gets off on it. I sat in my car. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Captain Frank Miller. Subject identified Kevin, the Torch Malloy. Did 6 years for insurance fraud and arson. Jason owes known loan shark $50,000. Be careful, Tom. Do you want me to send a car? I looked at the text. I looked at the picture of my house on my phone's lock screen. This was my castle, my fortress. If I arrested them now, Jason would claim coercion. Kevin would claim he was just a house guest. They might walk in 2 years, and the debt would still be there. They would come back. I needed a felony. I needed a Class A felony that carried a mandatory minimum of 20 years. I needed attempted murder. I typed back, no, not yet. I want them caught in the act. I want a charge that buries them. I started the engine. I wasn't a detective anymore. I was a structural engineer of a different kind. I was about to build a trap, and I was going to use myself as the bait. Wednesday morning broke with the color of a fresh bruise. The sky was a swollen, purplish gray, heavy with a rain that refused to fall. The barometer on my study wall was tapping against storm. I walked into the kitchen wearing my charcoal suit, the one I used to wear for court appearances. I carried a suitcase in my left hand. It was empty, but I carried it with the heaviness of a man burdened by duty. Good morning, I announced. My voice was projected, designed to carry to the guest room above the garage. Jason was at the coffee machine. He jumped. Kevin was nowhere to be seen, likely watching from the window slits of his garage lair. I have some news, I said, setting the suitcase down with a decisive thump. My sister in Ohio. She took a fall last night. Broken hip. She needs help settling into the rehab center. I paused for effect, letting the lie settle into the room like dust. I have to drive out there. I'll be gone for 3 days. It was the bait they had been salivating for. It was the key to the city. Jason's eyes lit up. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and I saw pure, unadulterated relief. The tension in his shoulders, which had been drawn up to his ears for a week, dropped 2 inches. Oh, Thomas, that's terrible, Jason said. He forced his face into a grimace of concern, but his voice was light, airy. But you should go. Absolutely, family comes first. I'll leave right after breakfast, I said. Don't worry about the house. A voice came from the doorway. Kevin stood there. He was leaning against the frame, peeling an orange with that knife, a folding buck knife, with a 4-inch blade that was far too aggressive for fruit. We'll keep it safe. Kevin smiled. Juice ran down his thumb. Hold down the fort. I'm sure you will, I said. I met his gaze. I let him see a tired old man. Not the wolf hunter. I let him see a man distracted by family grief. Just keep the noise down. I turned to Emily. She was sitting at the table, staring into a bowl of oatmeal she hadn't touched. She looked pale, her skin translucent. I walked over and hugged her. I held her tighter than usual. She felt fragile in my arms, like a bird made of hollow bones. I could smell the stale scent of the sedative on her skin, masking her natural perfume of vanilla and old books. Dad, she whispered. Her voice was foggy. Are you okay? You seem tense. Just worried about your aunt, I lied. The words tasted like ash. I was leaving my daughter in a house with 2 predators. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to draw my weapon, to handcuff them to the radiator, to end it now. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed the act. I needed the match to be struck. I love you, Em, I said, kissing her forehead. Remember that, no matter what happens. I love you. I love you too, Dad. Forgive me for leaving you. I thought as I walked away. I have to step out of the frame so I can save the picture. I walked out the front door. I got into my sedan. I backed out of the driveway slowly, deliberately. I saw Jason watching me from the living room window. He was on his phone before my rear tires hit the asphalt. He was calling the movers. He was calling the liquidators. I drove 2 miles, checking my mirrors constantly. I pulled into the parking lot of the massive chain grocery store at the edge of town. I parked in the busiest row, amidst the chaos of shoppers. I waited 10 minutes. Then I pulled a gray tarp over my car, obscuring the make and model. I walked. I hiked to the street behind my neighborhood. There was an abandoned community center there, backed by a dense stretch of woodland that bordered my property. I entered the woods. The path was familiar. I had walked it for years with my dog before he passed. The wet leaves silenced my footsteps. The air was cold and damp, smelling of decay and wet earth. I moved like a ghost, slipping between the oak trees until the white siding of my neighbor's house came into view. Mr. Walters was my neighbor to the east. He was 85 years old, a retired structural engineer, who spent his days building intricate ships and bottles. He possessed a mind like a steel trap, curmudgeonly, precise, and loyal to the bone. I tapped on his back door. 3 sharp raps. Rat-a-tat. The door opened instantly. "Thomas," Walters said. He was wearing a wool cardigan and holding a mug of tea that smelled of bergamot. "You're late. 3 minutes." "Traffic," I said grimly. "Come in. The show is about to start." We went up to his study on the 2nd floor. It was a room of dark wood and silence, filled with the smell of sawdust and old paper. The window faced west, offering a perfect, unobstructed view of my backyard and the large glass sliding doors of my living room. It was a sniper's nest, minus the rifle. Mr. Walters handed me a pair of high-powered naval binoculars. "They moved the van into the driveway 5 minutes ago," Mr. Walters said, his voice hushed. "White Ford Econoline, mud on the plates." "The wife left for work?" I asked, raising the binoculars. "Yes," Walters confirmed. "Emily left at 8:30. She seemed steady enough driving out." "She's safe at the school." I breathed a sigh of relief. As long as she was out of the house, the building was just wood and glass. Through the lenses, the scene was crystal clear. The van was backed up to my front door. 2 men I didn't recognize, broad, wearing generic gray coveralls, were moving with efficient haste. I watched them enter my home. It is a violation that is hard to describe. Watching strangers handle your life. They didn't treat my possessions with care. They treated them as inventory. I saw them carry out the silver tea set Martha had inherited from her grandmother. They dumped it into a plastic crate like scrap metal. I saw them carry out the oil paintings from the hallway. But then they did something that made my stomach turn over. They went into the sunroom, Martha's sewing room. I watched 2 men carry out her Singer sewing machine. It was a heavy cast-iron antique. It wasn't worth much money on the street, maybe $50, but it was worth the world to me. Martha had made Emily's prom dress on that machine. She had hemmed my trousers, sewn curtains, and mended 1,000 tears on that machine. The lead mover stumbled. He cursed. He tossed the machine into the back of the van. Crash! I saw it bounce. I imagined the cast iron cracking. I imagined Martha's hands on the wheel. My hands tightened on the binoculars until the metal bit into my skin. A low growl started in my throat. "Steady, Thomas," Mr. Walters said. He saw my knuckles turning white. He placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Let them load it. You need the movement of goods for the grand larceny charge." "I'm going to kill them," I whispered. "I'm going to go down there and break their legs." "No," Walters said firmly. "You're going to bury them, legally. You're going to put them in a box for 20 years. Don't trade justice for satisfaction, detective." I took a breath. I forced my heart rate down. He was right. They aren't just taking the TVs, I realized. Watching them haul out a rug. They're gutting the place. We watched for an hour. It was slow-motion torture. Then the mood changed. The van was full. The movers slammed the doors, accepted an envelope of cash from Jason, and drove away. The silence returned to the property. Now, only Jason and Kevin remained. I zoomed in on the living room window. They were arguing. Jason was pacing. He was waving his arms frantically. He looked like a man on the edge of a breakdown. He was pulling at his hair. Kevin was calm, terrifyingly calm. Kevin was sitting in my favorite leather armchair, the one I read in every night. He had his feet up on the ottoman. He was cleaning his fingernails with that knife. Jason is getting cold feet, I whispered. He realizes the theft isn't enough to cover the debt. He's a coward, Mr. Walters grunted. Cowards are dangerous. They panic. I saw Kevin stand up. The movement was explosive. He shoved him hard, sending him stumbling back against the mantel. Kevin got in his face. He was pointing a finger, shouting something. I couldn't hear, but the body language was clear. Do what you are told. Kevin pointed to the garage. Jason nodded frantically. He looked terrified. He looked like a child being scolded by a monster. Here it comes, I said. Kevin walked out the back door and headed to the garage. He disappeared for a moment and returned carrying 2 large red canisters. Jerry cans. Gasoline, I said. They aren't even going to use something subtle like faulty wiring. They're going brute force. Arson in the 1st degree, Walters noted. Mandatory minimums apply. Why are they waiting? I asked. The van is gone. The house is empty. Kevin set the cans down in the living room. He checked his watch again. He looked out the window at the street. He sat back down. Wait, Mr. Walters said. He pointed a gnarled finger toward the trees. The wind. What about it? It's picking up from the north. Gusts up to 20 miles per hour. Walters turned to me. And look at the street. What time is it? 1:20 p.m. The elementary school bus, Walters said. It drops off at the corner at 1:30. The street will be full of parents and kids for 10 minutes. I felt a chill. They're waiting for the street to clear, I said. And says, they want the wind to be high, so the fire spreads to the roof structure faster. If the roof collapses, the evidence of theft is buried in the rubble. They are professionals, Walters agreed. Evil, but professional. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Frank's name. Text to Frank. They have the gas cans out. They are waiting for the 1:30 bus to clear. Move in on my signal. Do not approach until I say go. Frank replied. Ramirez is staging the SWAT unit at the corner, just out of sight. We are ready, waiting for your green light. I lowered the binoculars. The trap was set. The players were on the stage. But then the universe threw the dice. Through the lens, I saw a car turn onto the street. A familiar, silver, compact car. No, I gasped. What is it? Walters asked. It's Emily, I said, my voice cracking. She's home early. I watched through the binoculars, helpless, as the physics of the situation collapsed. Emily wasn't supposed to be there. The variables had changed. It was 1:30 p.m. She should have been safely grading quizzes in a fluorescent-lit classroom 5 miles away. Why is she here? I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. She must have forgotten something, Walters said, his voice tight. Or maybe she felt sick. The stress. I saw Emily's silver car roll to a stop in the driveway, right behind the oil-stained Kevin's car had left. She opened the door. She looked exhausted. She was holding a stack of papers, student essays likely, clutched to her chest like a shield. She walked toward the front door. She fumbled for her keys. Inside the house, I saw the reaction. Jason froze. He was standing in the center of the living room, holding a red gas can, tilting it over the Persian rug. The liquid was glugging out. Kevin looked up. He didn't look panicked. He looked annoyed, like a contractor dealing with a scheduling error. She's going to walk into a bomb, I whispered. Emily opened the front door. I saw her body language shift instantly. The smell must have hit her like a physical blow, the thick, sweet, sickening stench of high-octane gasoline. She dropped the papers. They scattered across the porch and the foyer like white feathers, fluttering down into the fumes. She took a step inside. Jason? I imagined her calling out. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I'm going in, I said. I dropped the binoculars. They hit the floor with a heavy thud. Take this, Walters said. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a heavy, black object. It was a maglite. one of the old police issue models made of anodized aircraft aluminum. It was a foot long and weighed 3 pounds. It wasn't just a light, it was a bludgeon. "I'm calling it in," Walters shouted as I turned for the door. "Go!" I ran. I haven't run like that in 10 years. I ran down the stairs of Walter's house, taking them 2 at a time, ignoring the protest of my knees. I burst out his back door and sprinted across the lawn. The wet leaves were slippery. I nearly went down, but I scrambled for balance. My hand clawing the bark of an oak tree, I vaulted the low fence between our properties. I wasn't 70 years old anymore. Adrenaline is a time machine. I was 30. I was a lieutenant. I was a father. The only thing that existed was the distance between me and that back door. I burst through the rear patio door of my house. "Emily!" I roared. The sound shattered the stillness of the house. The scene in the living room was a tableau of nightmares. The air was shimmering with fumes. It burned my eyes instantly. The floor was soaked. The liquid had pooled around the legs of the furniture, soaking into the antique rug. Emily was standing in the center of the room, near the foyer archway. She was paralyzed. Her hands were over her mouth. Her eyes were darting between the man she married and the stranger with the knife. Kevin had moved. He was behind her now. He had grabbed her by her hair. With his other hand, he held a silver Zippo lighter. The lid was open. The flint wheel was waiting. "Don't move, sweetheart," Kevin hissed. His voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. "Or we all go up." "I don't mind the heat." Jason was cowering in the corner by the fireplace. He was still holding the gas can, clutching it like a teddy bear. He was trembling so hard the gasoline was sloshing inside the plastic. "Kevin, stop." "That's my wife," Jason screamed. His voice was high, cracking. "She's a witness," Kevin yelled back, spittle flying. "She saw the setup. Shut her up, or I will." I stepped fully into the room. The fumes were dizzying. One spark, static electricity, a light switch, a gunshot, and the house would become a bomb. "Let her go," I said. My voice was low. I held the heavy flashlight down by my leg, hidden against the fabric of my trousers. Kevin spun slightly, dragging Emily with him. She whimpered, a sound of pure terror. "The old man," Kevin laughed. It was a jagged, manic sound. "You're supposed to be in Ohio. You're supposed to be crying over your sister." "I never left," I said. I took a step forward. My shoe squelched in the gasoline-soaked rug. "I've been watching you for 3 hours." "Back off!" Kevin clicked the lighter. A small flame erupted. Flick. "No!" Emily screamed. "I'll light it," Kevin screamed. "I swear to God I'll drop it right here. I'll burn us all to hell." I stopped. The flame was inches from Emily's blouse. The air was so rich with fuel. I could taste it on my tongue. I looked at Jason. He was pressed against the wall. He looked small, pathetic. "Jason," I said. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes locked on the flame in Kevin's hand. "Look at me. Look at what you've done." I didn't mean," Jason blubbered. "He's going to kill her, Jason. Right in front of you. Is this what you wanted? For the money? To pay off Vinny?" "No." Jason whimpered. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the snot. "Then do something," I shouted. My voice thundered in the room. "Be a man for once in your miserable life. Help her." Jason looked at Kevin. He looked at the lighter. Then he looked at Emily. Emily looked back at him. Her eyes were pleading. She was begging him to move, to tackle Kevin, to do anything. And then, I saw it, the moment that broke my daughter's heart forever. Jason made a choice. He looked at the fire risk. He looked at the door. He took a step back, away from Emily, toward the kitchen exit. He was running. He was leaving her to burn so he could save his own skin. Emily saw it too. Her face went slack. The terror was replaced by a profound, hollow shock. He didn't just break her heart. He threw it into the furnace. But when I saw him move, the sadness vanished from my mind. Only the cold, hard steel of the job remained. The calculation was simple. Neutralize the threat. "Wrong choice," I said. But I didn't lunge. I threw. I brought my arm up in a whip-crack motion. I hurled the heavy aluminum flashlight with every ounce of strength left in my rotator cuff. It wasn't a random throw. It was aimed. It struck Kevin square in the center of his forehead. Crack! The sound was sickening. Bone meeting metal. Kevin's eyes rolled back. He staggered. His grip on Emily's hair loosened, but as he fell backward, his hand opened. He dropped the lighter. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the silver Zippo tumble end over end. I saw the small blue flame dancing on the wick. It hit the gasoline-soaked rug. Whoosh! It wasn't a fire. It was an explosion of air pressure. A wall of orange and blue flame erupted instantly, reaching from the floor to the ceiling in a heartbeat. It sounded like a jet engine taking off in the living room. The force of the ignition knocked me backward. "Daddy!" Emily screamed. She was on the other side of the wall of fire. The flames were licking up the curtains, consuming the oxygen. The heat was unbearable. It singed my eyebrows instantly. The smoke was thick, black, rolling across the ceiling. "Jump!" I yelled, shielding my face with my arm. "Jump through the fire, Emma. Come to me." She was frozen. Terror had locked her muscles. She was backing away, coughing, disoriented by the flash. I didn't think. You don't think in moments like that. You just act. I took a deep breath of the cleanest air I could find near the floor. I dove. I threw myself through the wall of flames. I felt the heat sear my skin. I felt my jacket catch fire on the sleeve. I hit the floor on the other side, rolling to extinguish the flame on my arm. I scrambled up. I grabbed Emily. I tackled her. I wrapped my blazer around her head to protect her hair and lungs. "Hold your breath," I commanded. I drove us both toward the back door. The heat was blistering now. The paint on the walls was bubbling. The fire alarm was finally screaming, a high-pitched wail that pierced the roar of the flames. We crashed onto the patio stones. I rolled us further onto the wet grass, away from the inferno. Cough, cough, gasp. We lay there, tangles of limbs and I checked her face. She was covered in black ash, her eyes red and streaming, but she was breathing. Inside the house, the suppression system I had installed 5 years ago, a precaution for my woodworking shop that I extended to the main house, finally kicked in. Hiss, hiss, the sprinklers popped. Water rained down inside the living room, fighting the gasoline fire. Steam billowed out the broken windows. Kevin was on the floor inside. I could see his shape through the glass doors. He was groaning, holding his head, trying to crawl away from the heat. Jason was trying to open the front door, but in his panic, his hands were too slippery with sweat to work the deadbolt. He was trapped between the fire and the police. And then, the front door exploded inward. A battering ram. "Police! Get down! Get down!" Officer Ramirez led the charge, his tactical vest bulky, his weapon drawn. A team of blue uniforms poured into the smoke-filled foyer. They tackled Jason before he could get the door open. I saw them drag him down, his face pressed into the wet, gasoline-soaked floorboards. They dragged Kevin out of the puddle of water and fuel. He was limp, blood streaming from his forehead where the flashlight had connected. Captain Frank Miller walked in behind them. He stepped over the debris. He had his gun drawn, but he lowered it when he looked through the shattered back door and saw me on the grass. I gave him a thumbs up. My hand was shaking. The house was ruined. The walls were scorched. The floor was destroyed. But the fortress had held just long enough. I sat on the patio stones, the cold dampness of the ground seeping through my ruined trousers. I was holding Emily. She was shaking. It wasn't a tremble. It was a vibrational frequency that rattled her teeth. She was covered in soot, her face a mask of black and gray, streaked with rivulets of tears. She smelled of smoke, gasoline, and fear, a perfume I had smelled on 100 victims before, but never on my own blood. "I've got you," I whispered, over and over. It was a mantra. "I've got you. You're safe." The adrenaline was leaving my body, replaced by a crushing fatigue. My arm, where the fire had kissed me, was beginning to throb with a dull red heat. The backyard was a chaotic light show. The blue and red strobe lights of the police cruisers bounced off the wet trees, creating disorienting shadows. The fire department was dragging heavy hoses through my garden, their boots crushing Matis hydrangeas. I didn't care. Let them crush it all. We were breathing. We sat on the bumper of an ambulance, wrapped in heavy wool blankets that scratched my neck. A paramedic was checking Emily's oxygen levels, shining a penlight into her dilated pupils. "She's in shock, Lieutenant," the paramedic said to me, using my old rank, "but her lungs sound clear." Then they brought them out. Kevin came first. 2 officers had him hooked up under the arms. He was conscious but groggy, blood streaming down his face from a jagged cut on his forehead where the mag light had split the skin. He looked at me as he passed. There was no smirk left, just the dull, glassy stare of a man who knows he's going back to a cage. Then came Jason. He wasn't fighting. He was weeping. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, like a child wearing a man's suit that didn't fit. His hands were cuffed behind his back, forcing his chest out, exposing his vulnerability. He saw us. He tried to stop, digging his heels into the gravel. The officer behind him shoved him forward, but Jason twisted his neck. "Emily!" he cried out. His voice cracked, high and pathetic. Emily didn't look up at first. She was staring at the ground, at the ash on her boots. "Emily, please. I didn't mean for this to happen," Jason pleaded. "They made me. I was scared. I panicked." Emily slowly raised her head. I watched her face. I expected anger. I expected screaming, but there was none of that. Her expression was something far worse for Jason. It was empty. It was the look of someone observing a stranger. She stood up. The blanket fell from her shoulders. She walked 3 steps toward him, stopping just out of his reach. "You panicked?" she asked. Her voice was a rasp, rough from the smoke, but it cut through the wail of the sirens like a razor blade. I didn't know what to do," Jason blubbered. "The fire, it happened so fast." "You looked at me," Emily said. She spoke slowly, dissecting the moment. "You looked at the fire. You looked at the door. And you chose the door. I was going to get help." Jason lied. Even now, at the end of the world, he was trying to sell the con. "You ran," she said. It was a statement of fact, devoid of emotion. "You left me standing in gasoline, and you ran." She turned her back on him. It was the most violent thing she could have done. She erased him. "Get him out of here," I said to Frank Miller. Frank nodded, his jaw set in a hard line. He shoved Jason toward the squad car. As they pushed his head down to get him into the back seat, Jason looked back one last time. He realized then that the ATM was closed. The trust fund was gone. The wife was gone. The door slammed shut. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. Mr. Walters walked over from the fence line. He was leaning heavily on his cane. His cardigan buttoned wrong, he looked old, frail, and utterly indomitable. He handed me a bottle of water. His hand was trembling slightly. Parkinson's, or maybe just the aftermath of war. "Nice throw," Walters said. He gestured to the ambulance where they were bandaging Kevin's head. "Center mass." "Thanks for the light," I replied. I took a long drink. The water tasted like iron. "I think I broke it, though. I owe you a new one." "Keep it," Walters smiled grimly. "Consider it a souvenir, or a paperweight." He looked at the house. The windows were blown out. The siding was scorched black in a V pattern rising from the living room. The smell of wet charcoal was overpowering, a scent that sticks in your nose for weeks. "It's a mess." Walters noted. "The frame held," I said, my engineer's eye scanning the load-bearing walls. "The joists are intact. The roof didn't sag." "Good bones," Walters agreed. "Good bones save lives." 6 months later, the smell of smoke was finally gone, replaced by the scent of fresh pine sawdust and paint. The contractors had finished the living room last week. We chose a lighter wood for the floors, maple instead of oak. We wanted to brighten the space, to chase away the shadows. I was in the garage workshop. The spring rain was falling outside, a gentle, nurturing sound, very different from the storm that had brought the wolves. I was sanding a new birdhouse. Swish, swish, swish. The rhythm was meditative. "Dad?" I turned. Emily was standing in the doorway. She looked different. She had cut her hair short, a bob that framed her face. It made her look older, sharper. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. The divorce had been finalized 10 days ago. Jason had taken a plea deal. 15 years for attempted murder, arson, and grand larceny. Kevin, with his priors, got 25. They were in different prisons. I made sure of that. "Hey, sweetie," I said, putting down the sanding block. "Mr. Walters is here," she said. "He brought pie." "Apple?" "Blueberry," he said. "It's good for the eyes." I smiled. "I'll be right there." Emily lingered. She walked into the workshop, running her hand over the smooth surface of my workbench. She traced the grain of the wood. She stopped at the red tool chest. "The lock was new. You knew, didn't you?" she asked softly. She didn't look at me, from the very beginning. "You knew he was bad." I wiped the sawdust from my hands with a rag. "I suspected," I said carefully. "I didn't want to be right, Em. I wanted him to be the man you thought he was." "But you prepared," she said. She looked up at me, her eyes were clear. The fog of the sedatives and the love was long gone. "The locks, the neighbors, the bank. You were fighting a war. I didn't even know we were in." "A father is always a watchman," I said. "We stand on the wall. We look for the wolves." "I'm sorry I didn't listen," she whispered. A tear traced the path of the old scars on her soul. I brought him in. I invited him. I walked over and took her hands. They were strong hands now. "You listened when it mattered," I said firmly. "You survived. You walked through the fire. That wasn't me, Emily. That was you." She stepped forward and hugged me. She buried her face in my shoulder, smelling of sawdust and rain. She felt different than she had 6 months ago. The fragility was gone. There was a steel core to her now, forged in the heat of that Tuesday afternoon. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, Em." I turned off the workshop light. We walked back toward the house together under the umbrella. I stopped at the patio and looked up at the living room window, the glass I had looked through with binoculars, watching strangers dismantle my life. The glass was new. The view was clear. I remembered the moment I threw the flashlight. I remembered the split second where I had to choose between the law and my daughter's life. It wasn't a choice at all. I looked at the house. It wasn't just wood and brick. It was a testament. It had been breached, burned, and battered, but it was still standing. I was the watchman. I was the father. My shift wasn't over. As long as there was breath in my lungs, the gate would be barred, and the lights would be on. I opened the back door, and we went inside, leaving the darkness behind us. Final message. Thanks for walking this journey with us all the way. With Thomas and Emily safe, and the wolves behind bars, do you think the punishment fit the crime, or did Jason deserve a harsher fate for his betrayal? Let us know in the comments.